having an IMF funding reserves economic conversation now, and our guest is in the studio this morning. Dr. Stephen Gachie is an economist, and we're talking about the impact of IMF funding on Kenya's economic reserves. That's the conversation that we'll have this morning. Good morning.
Good morning,
Dr. Gachie. How are you?
I've been well. And you?
I'm all right. Karibu sana.
I just told you off mic that the last time I was here, I didn't get the advantage to meet the gracious lady.
Oh, why, thank you, sir. I'm very glad that you're here this morning, and it is a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure.
And let CT welcome you in proper Situation Room style with today's proverb, and then you can interpret that for us according to you, right?
Yes, our proverbs for the whole of this week come from the Gambia. The Republic of the Gambia. I like saying it because it is one of the few countries that are prefixed with the. See, there is not the Kenya or the Uganda or the Tanzania, but it is the Gambia.
Okay.
And everyone knows it to be the Gambia. Now the proverb, if a donkey kicks you and you kick it back, you are both donkeys.
Well, since I'm a Wairimu, I'll borrow from what I normally tell my students. There is no long answer in my class. So I'll pull that to you and I say, if a donkey kicks you and you back, you're both
Donkeys.
Well, I think it's how you approach things and life. To me, it's how you interpret life and how, because you always believe in what you call cause and effect. So depending on how you interpret a situation, gives you the impetus to go forward and how you look like going forward. Yep.
Okay. I mean, your interpretation makes sense. I think even as we go into this conversation now, this is coming off of the back of what we've seen recently, that the Central Bank of Kenya projects its usable foreign currency reserves to rise by 187.4 billion shillings this year, boosted by inflows from the IMF, enhancing the country's resilience to economic shocks. Using a lot of economic speak to basically say that, there's going to be money pumped in, and this will allow the country to work on its development projects. Right? All right. So here we go into the conversation whereby the IMF is seen as a booster towards Kenya's economy. But is that really the case? Can you give us an overview of what international monetary funds actually do for the country's economy?
Well, thank you. I'll first mention what just spoken to KCB to Jajiri. And I love the shared value approach to solving social problems.
Yes.
The beauty about it is the Kenya becomes a startup country from a hustler country. And you look at the hustler model, it lacks the philosophy, like what Tujajili has, which is almost a social enterprise and a shared value. So had it borrowed that philosophy, probably would have had more success. So I want just to celebrate what you just, because I was listening in.
Yes.
Now we go to IMF and what we normally call the import cover. Because basically when we talk about the reserve, we are talking about the country has import cover. However, I'll look in two ways. As we celebrate that we are backing up our reserves, we must ask ourselves, what is the source? And quickly, I would want to be a bit philosophical and I give an analogy, city. That in the village where I come from, old men will go drink and come home singing about their goats. And then, and they are fathers of sons. And those who have daughters will tell them, tell them, all your goats, we are going to take them away. Because you are going to pay a bright price.
Yes.
It's the same about our reserve. Because we get from IMF, and within 1-2 years, we are going to pay loans. If you look at our budget, about a trillion Kenya shilling, we are going to pay loans.
Yeah.
So as much as the political class, I see sometimes in their meetings celebrating how the economy is doing, the reserve has been bumped up, we must ask ourselves, where is it coming from? And what does it mean to our economy? Two things, very good that we have import cover, But we need to interrogate those numbers. One of them, why do we have a bumper reserve? One of them is that we're getting a loan from IMF. So we are going deeper in loans and debt obligations. Number two, what is that we are doing with the money? Some of which maybe we are paying recurrent expenditure. Like the way I gave the story of the goats, a lot of it, 2027, we're having a maturity of loans and we are paying interest. So we need to interrogate and get to know where is the source of these funds so that we can celebrate our economic growth. If you look at it, it's a good feel-good factor, but fundamentally, it's sitting on quicksand.
How so?
Because look at where is it money coming from? Is it coming from agriculture exports?
No.
If you look at our manufacturing sector, we are told it is one of sector has the largest NPL, non-performing loans, because production is low. Manufacturing imports low materials, meaning we are not importing to produce. So that's why we have a bit of reserve. Is it a good thing? No. Okay? Are we getting this money from our cut flowers?
No.
No. Are we getting from tourism? No. So what does that tell you? A good thing to have reserve. However, the source, we need to work on the source.
So why is it a poor source if it's coming? Because it is lent money, essentially.
It's a loan.
It's a loan. So why is it not a good source that would then be an economic marker of progress or development?
For me, why it's not a good source is because when you borrow, you're borrowing. It's like digging a hole to cover the other one. I see it's a good thing, and even for political class, when they travel, they'll have some dollars for their PDM. We have a lot of it. But if we look critically, I think what we must interrogate and what should concern the central bank governor is where is our reserve coming from? Downstream, our G2G deal with petroleum and fuel is about 1 year, 6 months to pay. Meaning in the next 6 months, we'll have a huge payment for our supplies. The month of March, for those who are in corporate space, is when they'll be paying dividend payouts. Last year, there was a problem that a lot of people could not repatriate their funds back to where they are. I would be happy if we have a lot of dollars in reserve coming from foreign direct investments.
Okay.
What it means, when you have such money coming from there, is that we have money in our country and we are creating employment, because a lot of money, dollars, forex is coming through investments. Interrogate where we are. About 30 companies have crossed. Others have relocated. Those are who are in manufacturing, maybe they were producing, meaning probably that is why we have this bumper reserve, because some of those who would have maybe produced or used the dollars to import. However, we say a loan is as good as what it's going to do. And I keep telling people that if Citi would borrow a loan and go and pay dowry, there's a problem.
What do you mean?
If he borrows a loan to go and
Pay dowry.
Marry a wife.
marry a wife, second or third, or even to celebrate the first
Our
one.
wife is an asset.
Oh, here we go.
So they are good.
To reap.
They are good. They are good and bad loans. So we need to do, if we borrow from IMF or bank and we go and do development, especially capex expenditure, which have a ripple effect to the economy, that is very good. But if you borrow, last year we had a Eurobond issued. Why did we issue a Eurobond? We issued a Eurobond so that we can last another loan.
Yeah.
So I think good conversation, but for me, I'll be concerned where the resource is coming from and what is that we are doing with the money.
We had our good friend, the deputy government spokesman, and we've had many politicians say today that the pain Kenyans have felt has resulted in us getting out of the hole we were in 2022, and we are now doing better. The dollar is at 129, and our debt crisis is essentially over. And for a lot of us Kenyans, macroeconomics, comme ci, comme ça, we don't know. And you look at, for example, projection of growth is at 4.8%. There's the fact that, inflation has gone down. So how do we interpret, and more specifically, the fact that the government now says that we are in a better place than we were in 2022? How do we elucidate that?
Well, sometimes I listen to the government spokesman, and I always say he's like, that Masai Dawa that cures everything.
Supposedly.
Hey, Masais were just chilling.
And it's usually in a 5-liter jerry can.
Yes.
So, I think his approach to communication is that way. He cannot be knowing everything. And that's sometimes they fail to communicate. Because if you look at the fundamentals, macro, micro fundamentals of economy, when your inflation is low, should mean a linear relationship, the cost of living should be low. When your Kenya shilling or your currency is trading favorably against the major world currencies, it means then the cost of importation is cheaper. However, if you look at how we are and how we are seated, there is what we call an inverse relationship, where you put a positive, but the outcome is negative. And that is what the economists with government have not been able to crack. Simple. You cannot grow economy organically through taxation. It doesn't happen. Not in any other jurisdiction. Even in Kenya, it won't happen.
No, not on planet Earth.
Yes. We've never been to the other side. What is happening is that people don't have the purchasing power. Our household per capita income is not growing.
It is shrinking, actually.
If you look at, and why? Same thing we're talking about why we are celebrating reserve. 70% of housing in Kenya, they rely on agriculture. So when you don't think agriculture, when manufacturing is not doing well downstream, value addition means we are not getting as much from agriculture, meaning people simply don't have money in their pockets. Sadly, a lot of politicians, sometimes economists in government, they want us to believe that the price of unga is a fundamental economic indicator, which is not. Someone will tell you unga is at 129. And even when it's at 129, there are people who are struggling to buy because they don't have money in their pockets. So even if all other economic, macro, micro, fundamental factors are showing differently, the reality on the ground is that the cost of living continue to rise and people are not able to do that despite the inflation being at 2.83%.
So what would balance or what would tip the scales? That here you are saying that the rates of inflation has dropped, which is a good thing when you're talking about the economy, right? But then it is immeasurable if the cost of living has not also dropped in equal or less measure. So what do you do to ensure that the numbers at which you see inflation falling is also represented in how, citizens are able to afford life?
You work on those sectors where people earn their money.
And do what?
You look at the informal sector. How much do they pay on late taxation and all that? That is the thing, that sometimes we are taking so much away from the common mwananchi or the consumer that he is not able to consume. And the economy grows through production and consumption. As long as that we don't work on our agriculture sector, we don't work on our informal sector, then we'll have difficulties to grow this economy. If you look at the manifesto, there were very good things that they meant to do that. Like sometimes, I don't know, I'll sound academic. There is what I call hypothetical brightness. Hypothetical, and I hope when Dr. Muruka comes, let him extend the theory, my theory. Hypothetical brightness is when you have a hypothesis, but you are bright to the key holding assumptions. Okay? For example, one of a hypothetical brightness is that the government, through manifesto, they talked about aggregation centers. So what were they? But they were blind to the key holding assumptions that you need people producing so that they can bring into your aggregation centers. Hustler model, another one. Hypothetical brightness. But you want people to start a business, but the key holding assumption is that the environment must be light. For example, you give a young man 2,000 shillings, but for him to start a business in a county, he must pay a license, cost 9,000. Okay? Are we together?
Together, fully.
Hypothetical brightness. We want to have 200,000 house through affordable housing, but you ignore key holding assumption that the government has a problem with absorption of resources. That is why they have about almost 400 billion in treasury bill and treasury bonds.
I need you to expound on that just a little bit.
I'm saying, if it's in the papers today, I think yesterday, that the hypothesis that they came with is that if you want to create employment,
Yes.
we need to have this affordable housing working. That
Yes,
is the
because people who are building,
Yes.
will get jobs,
yes,
and
we have
such,
people who are doing the networks and everyone.
the plumbing and all of this.
Plumbing. Okay, so we'll have this army of young men trotting and walking to the working sites. That is the hypothesis. But the hypothesis is blind. That's why it's saying you suffer from hypothetical blindness when you are blind to the key holding assumptions which are there, that the government has a problem with absorption of resources even from the donor community. 30%. So until as when you work on that assumption, which is real, then that is why we have about 400 billion in treasury bills and bonds invested, because the program cannot absorb.
Okay.
Let me just read some facts before we go on break. So this is KNBS data, Economic Survey Population, 2023. So quick one, maize grew by the 38%, 2022-2023. Wheat,
Maize production grew
Maize
by
production.
yeah, 38%. Wheat production reduced by 16.1%. Rice grew by 19%, tea by 6.6%, coffee by negative 6.2%, and sugarcane by negative 36.9%. I know we're going to a break. Let me just get the manufacturing data. Structural metals 17% up, processing and preserving fish 16.2% up, manufacturing of sugar 15.0% up, motor vehicle trailers, semi-trailers assembly 21.7, 16.4, 15.3. This is 2023. I must be very careful to add that. When we come back, in real terms, because sometimes we see growth together with population growth, and then international market issues come into it, together with the ability of government to absorb its own budget. So that will be my question when we come back.
Okay, hold on to that and don't forget it, because you'll have that. And Economist Dr. Gachie is with us this morning, and we're looking at, okay, so if you have reserves that have come from a loan, do you really have reserves? Your reserves should actually come from money that you have made by manufacturing, by exporting, and FDI, foreign direct investment. This morning, we are continuing with our conversation with Dr. Gachie, an economist, and we're saying, okay, well, here we are. Are we loading on false hope? And Mark, go ahead.
Because, the numbers, and someone says, you give me enough numbers and I'll show you whatever I want to show you. You've talked about the real GDP in terms of a GDP per capita. You've talked about putting into perspective what the government is doing. Now, my question is, there is signs of growth. They've even projected 4.8%. So that usually brings the question of kicking the can down the road. So we've borrowed 40 billion. Let's kick it down 25 years down the line, because we know by then we will have made money. Some countries have lived by that principle. Does Kenya have an emergency, or can we just kick this can down the road, and pay it when those children are 35?
I think that is be postponing pain, isn't it?
Not only is it postponing pain, it's actually irresponsible, because there are other options available to us. We don't have to continue doing what we're doing. We don't have to. It requires a little boldness, and it requires a hell of a lot of discipline, but it can be done. And it certainly requires some very strict, serious leadership. It can be done. You see, the idea that we must keep spending on things which don't bring us direct benefits, and we borrow so that we can spend, you see the results. How do you expect the results are going to be different when you're borrowing and doing exactly the same thing? Yes.
You know why I ask this question? I ask this question because Kenyans must understand what the real issues are in this country that bring them pain. Because we've been told we need to pay more taxes because we are in debt distress, correct? Mm-hmm. We have been told that the debt distress is over, the economy is fixed, and all things will be rosy in 0.5 seconds, right? We've also been told that the economy is growing, right? We sitting at home, we sitting in studio.
Yes, we sitting there.
Yes, need to simplify the problems that Kenya has and not speak economic mambo jumbo that does not really address my pain point, and how do we bring that into perspective so that we can get to Citi's point about the discipline and the economic culture that needs to change in this country.
Okay.
You know something, Mark? These things we keep throwing around at our listeners, economic growth, economic development, GDP.
Yes.
These things are not complicated.
And that's exactly what we need to.
When we are making money as a country, it means there are things we are selling.
Yes. And others are buying.
Yes. And there are more people buying our stuff than we are buying from others.
Yes.
So it means we have more money because we're receiving more money from our goods. So when you ask, what is this growth that we see in the agricultural sector?
Yeah.
What you read doesn't paint that picture, does it?
No. Because if you look at and I want to mention that our growth was revealed backward from 5.5 to 4.9. What you're saying?
Yes.
Meaning, then we are not growing. We are not going to grow as projected. That was 2024. So if you look at 2025, there is nothing fundamental that you are doing differently. Unfortunately, let me go to the data that you just spoke to. If you look at the numbers, you talk about 38% growth in maize production. Do you see the money? Is there a bonus boom in maize growing areas, regions? No. And yet, we are still selling unga at 129 shillings or 120, and we are celebrating. Then we have a problem. Because what we are saying is that the farmer who is producing, the cost of production has gone up,
Yeah.
but the price of maize has gone down or constant.
Yes.
Bringing it down into small bits to say that farmer will not have money in the pocket. And what he'll have in the pocket, he cannot afford to consume beyond the basics. And when you don't, how does economy grow? Middle class expanding. Because other jurisdiction, middle class consume. And the last time I was here, we looked at, you walk around where you'd want to expect where middle class stays. But again, before I go there, I need to change the CS Bundy definition of a middle class. Because he's flatly wrong. You cannot have
Not
a middle
squarely
class.
wrong, flatly.
You cannot have a middle class who earns 60,000, between 60,000 and 100,000.
That's not middle class.
No, that's the National Bureau of Statistics definition.
Yeah.
Then they have a problem.
Yes.
If we borrowed from there, then the people who keep on data, because break it down, CT.
60,000.
If you are paying 60,000, you pay about, well, the minimum 18,000.
Rent.
No, pay as you earn.
Okay.
Yes, you start with the tax
Housing.
first.
Okay.
Chief Cha,
Yeah.
all those. So maybe you have about 40,000.
Yes.
Pay me maybe 15,000. Your rental. Put your lunch, commuter,
Transport.
School fees.
Negative zero. There is no middle class who will consume with a negative zero. So our middle class is not 60,000 to 100,000. We must build little middle class. Actually, that one is not even the lower middle class. So when go back to what I was saying, if you go to our credentials, Lavington, where you'd expect the middle class to stay, and there is a lot of spaces to rent, then there is an immigration to the other side of town where people are affording life. Are we saying then that other sector where you pay less is growing and this other one is not growing? So until we have the light, and what you say we need to break down to small bits is that we are hugely agricultural driven country. So if you don't put money and strategies in agriculture, manufacturing for value addition, 80%, we are told by data, our informal sector employs 80% of our population.
Yes.
So if you don't give incentives for them to grow,
To continue growth.
if you tax them, if you put levies, meaning then, and I said when I starting, you cannot grow economy organically through taxation.
In fact, the opposite is what you need to do.
What President Kibaki did, and sometimes I feel uncomfortable when KK government compares itself with Moi Kibaki.
Yes.
I get constipated. Economically.
Economic constipation.
Economic constipation, because if you look at his model,
Yes.
his model is
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.